If there's one steadfast rule in comic books right now, it's never trust Tom King. It doesn't matter how well the comic book starts. You know it's going to go one place, and that is destroying some characters. Obviously, within the Human Target so far, he's done some pretty nasty things to the character of Guy Gardner and certainly Martian Manhunter. This week in issue 6, he decides to return to Guy Gardner and I guess finish off the character. I have not been fooled by the Human Target. Obviously, I've covered it a couple times here. But there is an intriguing story, and the worst part about this is Greg Smallwood, in my opinion, is doing the work of his lifetime. The illustrations, the art in this comic book are phenomenal. They are so cool. They got this really great retro feel to them, and everything is just coming together perfectly as far as the artistic interpretation of the story. It's just a story that is constantly letting the artist down. Of course, a lot of artists would have experienced this in the past, specifically like a Clayman. Think about all the wasted pages in Heroes in Crisis that Clayman put together that were just absolute filler and nonsense that he ended up having to illustrate in that book. Tom King is exquisite at a couple of things. One of them is character assassination. Another is wasting some of the greatest artists in the entire comic book industry on some of these worthless stories he's doing. Now, the Human Target isn't worthless. I don't want to put that one out there. There's a really intriguing mystery here. For some reason, every chance he gets, he wants to destroy one of these JLI characters that a lot of people know and love. And it's not like anyone ever gets to see the JLI these days anyway, so this should be a treat. But because Tom King is on it, you know that something bad is going to happen. Let's get into the details behind the Human Target number 6. And the next, this is bad for Guy Gardner, but it's really worse for Christopher Chance and Ice. The comic issue itself actually is pretty boring. I think this is the worst issue by far so far. This is an issue I wouldn't have recommended even without what I'm about to talk about here, but it starts out boring. Not a whole lot going on here. Typical Tom King kind of filler stuff in the middle of the story. And we get to see the return of Guy Gardner, and he's once again mad at Christopher Chance for talking to Ice because apparently Ice belongs to him. Certainly in Tom King's mind, Guy Gardner is some type of jealous boyfriend that is likely or has the potential to murder somebody if he feels like he is being wronged or someone is taking his girl. So we have this initial encounter, and Guy Gardner gets his ring back, and he's going to take it to Christopher Chance for stealing his girl. He shouldn't even be here, he lets him know. And the way that Guy is talking to Ice here, like the verbiage that he's using, it's something you would associate with stalkers and abusers, specifically like in entertainment. You can say, he says, "That's enough of that, baby, isn't it? It's cute, and you're real cute, but you, baby, honey, please think through this. I'm a big boy. You don't want to do this." Like lingo that you would have associated with people with a foul character that you certainly wouldn't want anywhere near your mother or your girlfriend or your sister or any female, period. So Guy Gardner is once again essentially being framed in this story as that kind of man. He's a stalker. He's an abuser. That's the kind of character he is, which is obviously out of character for Guy Gardner. He's certainly a bit of a meathead. He's not one to step down from a fight. And yes, he does have an issue with Hal Jordan from time to time. He's certainly not scared of him. But this has never been the Guy Gardner we've ever seen in DC Comics. But that's not really the issue with this series specifically, because we've already seen this. Tom King has already established in his mind that Guy Gardner is an abusive man. What we do see is Christopher Chance decides to take a shot at Guy Gardner, which he knows he'll block, but will take some of his will away from Ice, who he's battling, move it towards Christopher Chance to save his life, and will free up Ice to use her powers fully on Guy Gardner, which she does, and she freezes him like a solid ice cube. As you can see here, by the end, he can no longer open his mouth or anything, so we've got Guy Gardner is frozen solid. What are they going to do now? Are they going to go call up the Green Lantern Corps and say, "Come in here and talk to your boy, he's getting out of line again"? Are they going to call other members of the JLI and say, "You need to come talk to this guy"? Are they going to call the police? What are they going to do? What are Christopher Chance and Ice going to do? Well, they decide to murder him. Christopher Chance punches him right in the head, smashes him into 1,000 pieces, and then Ice pushes him over like an ice statue, and he basically just shatters into a bunch of frozen pieces of Guy Gardner, which is bad enough. They've clearly murdered the man. And what do they do after that? They kind of just sit around and talk for a very long time. At least in my mind, the way I interpret comic book art, when you see a page like this, it is completely white and there are just some narration boxes. That tells me it is taking a very long time to get through this. They're sitting there watching him melt on the ground. These characters are murderers. Are we not supposed to be rooting for them to win in the end? Guy Gardner is positioned as the bad guy, as a villainous type of character at the beginning, but now they've murdered him. They've watched him essentially melt on the ground, and they have a conversation about how no one's going to be looking for Guy Gardner. In fact, Jon Stewart says Guy Gardner goes out on missions all the time. He turns off the locator function in his ring so no one knows where he is, because that would infringe on his liberties. I'm sure that verbiage was used for specific reasons by Tom King. And they just talk about how no one's going to know who he is, and he's just sitting there on the ground. Now, what do you think the heroes, the protagonists of this book would do next? Maybe now they've come to their senses. Maybe they were overcome with grief. Maybe they were in shock. Maybe now was the time to tell somebody that something has happened. No, now was the time to go upstairs, and it's time to fuck. They murder the guy. They make sure that he melts on the ground into nothingness. They talk shit about him and how no one's going to be looking for him. Then they go up into the bedroom and they decide to fuck. I don't know what to tell you. If you think this is the kind of storytelling that's riveting or really nuanced, like, oh my goodness, look how layered these characters are. Tom King is doing this and this. It's not that. This is character assassination, not only on the part of Guy Gardner, who isn't a stalker, who's not an abuser of women. It's character assassination on the part of Christopher Chance and Ice. These characters are supposed to be heroic. They're the protagonists of the story, although there certainly is a bit of a hint that perhaps Ice is the one that's actually poisoned Christopher Chance and she might actually be the murderer. But he's certainly supposed to be a hero, and he has murdered a member of the Green Lantern Corps in cold blood. He didn't do anything. And then he went upstairs and he took the murdered guy's ex-girlfriend and took her to Pound Town. That is the most unheroic shit I could ever think of. This isn't nuance. This is bad storytelling. Why can't we have heroes that you could aspire to or look up to or even understand their reasoning for doing this? I personally can't relate to anyone that would murder somebody and not call the police or freeze somebody to protect themselves. Hey, if you want to call that self-defense, but not go out and notify somebody so they could go take care of it, but then decide to murder them. Make sure they watch to make sure that there was no way you could save the person, and then go take the murder victim's girlfriend to Pound Town. No one can relate to this except for a sociopath or something. Like, this is terrible, terrible comic book writing. And I feel worst of all for JLI fans who are never going to see these characters. You never get to see them together. And this is what you get. And that is not the only terrible thing going on in this comic book. I'm going to show you a panel of what Tom King did with Greg Smallwood, who is illustrating the best comic book of his life. This is the work of a lifetime. This is the kind of artwork that can secure your legacy 50 years from now. You know what art was great in comic books? Go look at Greg Smallwood's illustrations on the Human Target. It's phenomenal. But you get stuff like this, a 9-panel grid of a telephone ringing. What an enormous waste, not only of real estate in a comic book, but an enormous waste of Greg Smallwood's talent. If you have Greg Smallwood on a comic like this that's doing some of the coolest noir art we've ever seen in comic book history, and this is what you ask him to illustrate, you are a fucking fool. I know that Tom King is obsessed with Alan Moore in the 9-panel grid. He's never been able to pull it off like Alan Moore, and he kind of makes himself look like a dipshit, and his fellow artists look like a dipshit when they actually have to do it. But this is terrible. And I feel bad for Greg Smallwood that his name and legacy are going to end up being tied to stuff like this. We do know that the Human Target is going on hiatus for 6 months. Greg Smallwood said on social media that he wanted to finish all the art before they produced and distributed the next comic book. I think that's really strange. The timing doesn't really work out. Obviously, it takes about 30 days to illustrate an issue. In 6 months, yes, he'll have all the issues illustrated, but that would mean you and I have to believe that he stopped working on the comic book. I think something is going down with this. I think DC Comics have seen the errors in Tom King's way, specifically here, and have probably intervened. And I think they're probably fixing the story. I think there's a lot more to that 6-month hiatus than Tom King and Greg Smallwood are letting on. I think they're having to fix a lot of stuff because Tom King, this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. He was probably going to do a lot worse stuff to some of these characters, specifically Martian Manhunter. He did some kind of nasty stuff to that character in the last issue. And I think DC Comics are trying to fix what is here because this doesn't need to be here. This isn't a hero story anymore. These guys are the villains now. Tom King needs to get his head out of his ass and figure out what he wants to be. Do you want to be a superhero writer or do you not? If you don't, go somewhere else, because DC is a superhero comic book company. And it's time for DC and Tom King to talk to each other and decide what their relationship is and if this is the right place for it. Now, obviously, I did review the first issue of Batman Killing Time, which I said was phenomenal. But it's issues like this and moments like this that let me know and give me pause. I shouldn't be recommending that comic book because it's Tom King. Tom King has actually done some worse character assassination in his career. If you don't know what he did to Mr. Terrific within the pages of Strange Adventures, you need to watch this. This is some of the most disgusting stuff I've ever seen a comic writer do to a character. Definitely check this out and know who you're dealing with when you buy a Tom King comic book.